Okay. So what we want to do today, and thank you so much for giving us the 30 minutes to give you an update. This is the first of what we hope to be a series of webinars. So I wanted to talk a little bit about why we're doing this and some of the topics that we'll be covering, including the topic for today. And I was hoping to kick off with a really short overview on Conteneo and what we're about. And I know that all of you folks on the call know who Innovation Games is, but we have recently changed the company name, and we've been working on what we hope is a better way to talk about what our company does and the kinds of things that we do and how we position ourselves. And to be honest, I was really interested in a bit of feedback from you, given the fact that you all know who we are. If you can just give us some feedback on our new positioning. And the bulk of this is going to be spent on talking about the employee engagement framework that we've been using. And we'll talk about a couple of companies that have used it, and then leave some time for some questions at the end. So this webinar series, this particular topic we thought was really quite interesting because we've been doing some projects around engaging with employees through the use of innovation games and serious games, and nurturing that engagement for the purposes of either innovation or process improvement or things like that, I think is really interesting. But we also feel like there are many other areas that we have a lot of experience in, and that all of you do as well, in the areas of portfolio management, using games for customer advisory boards, the specific details around planning innovation games events, and the using innovation games and serious games in strategic planning meetings. These are things that as a company we do a lot, and we know that a lot of our CCAs use these kinds of techniques in these situations frequently as well. And so we think we're going to cover some of these, but please, if you have other ideas about 30-minute webinar topics that would be really helpful to you or that you want to hear from us on, email Tammy, or you can IM her during this webinar. We'd love to have ideas from you. So let me just a couple of minutes on positioning. What we have realized over the course of a number of years is that while the use of serious games is certainly how we do what we do, what we're really all about is amplifying collaboration within organizations. And collaboration happens between so many different kinds of stakeholders. You know, this collaboration is incredibly important internal to companies, between different business units and different teams, inside teams, you know, single teams themselves. Obviously, we've spent so much time talking about collaboration with customers and partners and external stakeholders. And I think it started to become really clear and important that we separated the how from the benefit of doing it. And so this is really an effort to say, okay, what we're doing is taking the science of play and of games and serious games, and combining that with our professional services and our effort to be delivering more and better enterprise level software and analytics that will eventually come along with that. All of this has to come together to what we're saying superpower epic wins. And an epic win in business might be coming up with a brand new innovation and launching that through to recognizing revenue. But as you all know, we do a lot of work with budget games and civic engagement. And San Jose has certainly had an epic win in terms of engaging with their neighborhood leaders and citizens around balancing and managing the budget. So that's how we're currently talking about ourselves in terms of amplifying collaboration. And we like to compare collaboration to communication. So communication is certainly important, and we're doing it right now with webinars, and you know there's video conferencing and all these kinds of things. But the opportunity to work together in a recursive kind of way to accomplish a goal is really where we feel that serious games excels. And there are so many things that companies and organizations have to do where communication is insufficient. So let's see. The areas that we really focus on, and today obviously we're going to be talking about employee engagement for innovation, but many of you know us as platforms and techniques for market research. So that is going to continue to be a big area of focus for us. The development of strategy and portfolio prioritization, these are topics that you'll hear more from us over time. internal team performance, so how, understanding and creating alignment and engagement with employees is a big part of what we're doing. And then I think you're going to hear more and more from us around the topic of complex sales. Complex sales does require a lot of collaboration between vendors and partners and customers. And we've had a lot of success, specifically working with NetApp to do that. So these are areas that we're focusing on. I don't want to spend too much time on it because we only have 30 minutes together. But what I'm hoping you're all willing to do is, as you look at our new website, conteneo.co, the slides you just take to, had a look at, we're interested in understanding if we're being clear and if how we're speaking about Conteneo and our positioning, if it's useful and helpful to you. So at any point during this this webinar, please think about this, and you can type some questions or answers or suggestions over to Tammy, and we'd love to have your feedback on how we're positioning Conteneo. So with that, why don't we talk a little bit about the framework that I wanted to get your feedback on and present to you. It's all about engaging your employees for the purposes of innovation, but certainly the same framework could be applied to process improvement and things like that as well. You're all quite familiar with our ideas to action model. We have the kind of ideation starting phase where big thinking needs to happen, and there's not a lot of clarity necessarily. There's a very kind of divergent part of the process. Shaping is where the ideas start to gel and to be given context within the organization. And of course, before anybody can take action, that prioritization phase needs to happen. And then there's the action phase. Innovative ideas may end up being pursued by organizations, and there's a whole nother level of work that happens before an idea can actually see revenue or see completion. So the framework that we've been developing and now have been using really breaks up these sections into, okay, well, in this phase, which games do we use and how do we do it, and so on and so forth. So what I wanted to talk about first is how do we see this framework, and which games and what are the outcomes that we're expecting to get. So the first phase, we're just calling it the kickoff phase of what do you know, who do you know? And we look at this as kind of an interesting internal objective to figure out, well, we have an organization with potentially hundreds or thousands of employees. How do we create teams of people who have the right kind of shared interests, who would want to work together on an innovation challenge or on some kind of improvement for the organization? How do you find the people, and how do you know that they should be working together? There are two games that we've been using successfully for this phase to identify people in the organization who should be working together. First of all, buy a feature can be adapted to be called buy a project in this case. And items in the buy a feature game or buy a project game can be areas that people are interested in investing resources, either time or money or both. So they might be, or they might have identified areas that they would love to work in, or areas where they can see that improvement is definitely needed, but they don't necessarily have a solution for it. They just want to work in that area. And when people play this game in this way, what you're identifying are areas of shared interest relative to potential projects that could be pursued. The other game that we've used successfully in this is a variation of Nosy. So some of you might be familiar with Nosy. It's a way to look at the social graph or social preferences and build teams around shared interests that may not necessarily be tied to the professional objective. So, people who share interests in the same kind of food and sports and kind of travel may end up really enjoying working together because they have enough social shared interests where coming together for the purposes of developing an innovation team might actually be really interesting. The outcome of this is the creation of teams that intend to work together for the purpose of this innovation project. In this phase, it overlaps a little bit with the second phase as well, but this is also frequently where we start to look at some of the really big ideas that'll eventually be churned through in the innovation games process. But the effort here is very much early on identifying team interests and what teams work on. The middle phase is where this ideas to action framework may iterate more than one time. we had, one of the case studies we'll talk about is where this phase lasted just one day. But the idea here is the teams will work through very open-ended thinking, the shaping, and the prioritizing to come up at the end with either a business model canvas, which is something that we're very appreciative of Alexander Osterwalder having developed. It's a very useful way for people to end up with a result that other people can digest, or some kind of project plan. And the outcome here, the effort here is project teams who enter into this process should come out at the end with something very tangible, a project plan or that business model canvas. And we've used both as outputs of this phase. And then those are the artifacts that are then put into the selection and action phase. So, for example, that those are the things that would potentially be judged by some kind of committee to decide, well, what are the best ideas that came out of this, and are there ideas there that we could pursue? So could we award winners, or could we fund those projects? And so in each one of these phases, we have innovation games or a series of innovation games that we can put together to help these teams think about something that's potentially very complicated and come out with something that's very tangible at the end. So here's an example of the buy a feature game. This area here would be where you would put potential opportunities for investment. Now, the screenshot in the background actually comes from the San Jose Budget Games. I was unable to use a screenshot from a real project because there were sensitive information in there. But the idea would be that people may want to work in the area of developing a mobile strategy or new production technique, or maybe there's a potential new business model that they would like to work on. So these ideas are submitted to be included in the buy a feature platform, in this case, buy a project. Each one of them, and this is our recommendation here, is that each one of them are priced at $200 or whatever that number actually is, but it should be the same. Because at this point, we're not trying to figure out how big or how complex they are. We're really trying to determine is who's interested in working on what project. And then the output here is based on who bid and who contributed to the purchase of which one of these items that they could invest their time and effort into. That's how you end up determining, well, who is a potential great fit for the team. So if, Fred and Mary and Joe all put money and contributed to the purchase of the new production technique item inside this game, it's a natural fit for them to work on this in the innovation group or in the innovation, the innovation days, however long those may be. And then in the case of Nosy, here's where we're looking at social information. So people with common social attributes will frequently like to work together. And in the free version of Nosy, we have a huge number of general social topics that people can be interested. So maybe in this case, people who have the same love for college football teams and national parks end up wanting to work together because they have enough social commonality that it would be a fun group for them to be part of. I can certainly imagine using both of these, although the examples I'm going to talk about today used one or the other. So in the middle phase, this is where the traditional innovation games that all of you are familiar with are most useful. And the examples that I show up here are ones that I would just expect to have a really good fit in the taking these ideas and these new project teams who are now working together. These would be great games and most likely would end up in their selection of games to work through. And most of them are available online. So I could also imagine this phase being both an online experience and an in-person experience. They don't have to be one or the other. But in this case, the examples that I'm going to be talking about, this phase happened in an in-person kind of way. By the way, some of you may recognize that's actually the San Jose image from this last year, but I like to use it because some of the innovation work that we've done with various customers, it looks an awful lot like this. The tables are a little more spread apart, but it really does, some of them can get to be as big as this, which is why I picked that image. And then the action phase. So this is where I can see many of our CCAs who are on the call, people who do consulting for your own clients, would get involved in helping take one of these new ideas that pops out of an innovation engagement and helps the team work through the whole process of taking either a project or a new product idea and actually finishing it or seeing the revenue implications from it. So, this is an area that a lot of our partners and in fact our professional services group gets involved in as well. So that's essentially the framework that we use. And I just want to take a quick break here and ask for some feedback or some questions. Do you see this fitting into your organization? Can you see something like this fitting into the kind of work that you do with your clients or your customers? And we're just about to move into a couple of specific examples, but do you have any other questions? So this is a good time to message Tammy if you want to make sure that we cover anything in particular or you have any feedback for us here. So I'm going to move into the next part of this. And by the way, Joe, and for the rest of you on the call, if something comes up in the middle, as long as you remember to email us or I am Tammy, we can always take some questions offline or send a follow-up that includes some answers to things that you all hit us with. So we worked with a biotech company on the East Coast, and what their goal was to engage the entire organization in an innovation challenge. And typically, the innovation work that they've done with their teams was really relegated to the R&D department, and they felt that it was disempowering to other employees to not be asked for their good ideas and to be able to compete in something like this. And they also felt that they were probably missing a whole lot. If their innovation is being if only people with innovation in their title are people who are doing innovation, they just assume that they're missing something important. So the leadership invited everyone in the company to submit innovative ideas in the areas of process improvement, channel development, new product development. There were no restrictions. If the support staff wanted to submit an idea, nobody was left out of this. In the end, and this phase lasted about a month, and it was all supported by internal staff. So Conteneo did not have any involvement in this other than to help them review the what turned out to be 70 ideas that were submitted in the process. So those were the 70 ideas that were brought to where we did actually have involvement. So this middle phase right here ended up being about 20 teams that were created at the beginning of the innovation day. It was a 12-hour event, and the 20 teams were created by using more general unconference principles and with the inclusion of a public market. So they chose not to use any innovation game or nosy, and we came up with another way of getting teams to form, mostly because people already kind of knew who they wanted to work with, but what we were trying to encourage is for people to combine teams. So in the end, they ended up with 20, and each team worked through that ideas to action framework to come up with a business model that they could submit at the end of the event to the executive team. And it was an incredibly fun event. I mean, it was, they had all different kinds of food brought in, and there were breakout areas, and if people needed to go play ping pong for a little while, they could, before they came back to be working on their games. But essentially, the work was done through a whole variety of innovation games. So in the end, a project team was actually selected as a winner, and the folks on the project received $5,000. And I think even more exciting for the company was that they thought the idea was so good that they decided to fund it and actually put resources to it. And they spent, the next year actually working through this as a new project team. That wasn't something that the management team promised that would happen. In fact, I don't think that they even knew that they were going to be that excited to fund a project. So in some ways, it's incredibly low investment. And I think what they got out of it was more than just good ideas. I think the company really felt appreciated to have something this unique done and this new. So that is the biotech company example. The games that we used, all teams used Speedboat, Prune the Product Tree, and Remember the Future. I know there was a number that used Spiderweb and some of the other games, but these were the three that I think consistently were used by all of the project teams. So we're also doing this with HP right now. And we're in the first phase. So I can talk a little bit more intelligently about the first phase because we're doing that. And I can tell you how we think it's going to impact the other two phases, but it's a relatively new project for us. So we have now an HP version of Nosy. And we're in that phase right now where we're trying to figure out, well, how do we build the teams that are going to work together? And the idea here is that each current team will play at least 5 rounds of Nosy with people they already know. And some of the topics will be fun, kind of like the ones I showed earlier in the presentation. But there are also more specific HP topics that are going to help people identify areas of innovation passion that are more related to technology. And if each person plays at least 5 rounds of Nosy, we can start to create both a social graph and a preference graph or an alignment graph around who knows who well and how are people aligned around topics that are both social and perhaps more business oriented, so that we can create new innovation teams comprised of people who don't currently work together, who will then move into the whole ideas to action side, where they'll be working on new challenges to develop new innovative products, processes, or services for HP. So this is going to span quite some time. I would say this is the months kind of project where we're looking at something that not only happens once and spans a number of months, but becomes a template that HP can then deploy with minimal help from Conteneo. This should be a framework and a bunch of trained facilitators and people who understand the game, people who have access to all of the either platforms or in-person game materials they need, and can apply this framework at a smaller level or at a bigger level, depending on what they're trying to accomplish with their teams. In the end, they absolutely want to be able to identify some winning ideas that probably would have been more difficult to get, or take longer to get, or would not have had such an impact on the culture. So the output here is create an innovative or a culture that values innovation and also comes out with some pretty interesting ideas. So these are two tangible stories that are very current for us. And what's next? If anyone on the call is interested in playing a version of Buy a Project, and this would be the version of the game that would help people identify who could potentially work together and what kind of project, we have one. And so I would say email Tammy, and then you can be included in the poll that we'll send out to pick or allow you to select dates where this particular game would fit into your schedule. So last question to think about and to let us know. Could you imagine producing an event like this? And if you were planning on doing this with minimal big involvement from Conteneo, what else would you need from us to succeed at this? So that's one thing that we want to ask you. And the intent for this webinar is to both give you enough ideas on how to do this, to give you the framework that we've used successfully, and to give you or to empower you to go off and do this on your own. But of course, some of them are, I'm also interested in figuring out from a professional services standpoint, is this the kind of project that you would also think about hiring us to help you do? So, the other engagements that we talk about, typically they start at about $25,000 for roughly 25 participants. And, I can also see an instance where we would build something specific for a company and perhaps produce it in concert with you. So what we're looking for is to kind of do enough where people who are really experienced with innovation games have yet another thing that they can bring into their organization and do on their own. Or if it just makes more sense based on size or complexity to have us help you, our professional services group loves to do this kind of thing. So we have just a couple minutes before we have to wrap up. This is definitely a time where we want to take any last questions from you. And in terms of what's coming up from us, we have refreshed our Buy a Feature platform, so you may have noticed that it looks a little bit different. We've just published our first playbook about portfolio prioritization. And so Tammy will be sending all of you at the end of this a link so that you can download that. What's next after this particular webinar? So if there are other things that you want us to talk about, what else do you need? If you have any other questions, either we'll take them now or we can take them offline as well. So, Tammy, you're probably trying to talk at me, and I realized I've had you muted the whole time. So let me see if I can give you a voice here. Okay, Tammy, do we have any questions?
Am I here?
Yep, you're
Yes,
here.
David has a question that he just asked about Nosy. Can Nosy be personalized to a company's domain? And if so, are there examples?
Yes. So Nosy has been designed to be skinned, and at a two levels. What that means is from a branding standpoint, it can look like that organization's brand, and the content in Nosy, in terms of what the topics and items are, can be very specific to what they're looking for. So in the case of this HP example, when you open HP Nosy, there are topics and items that are very special to HP, and we've developed those in concert with them for this project, and they have general social topics and items, and some of those would be things that you saw in this presentation, things like favorite football teams and stuff like that. So yes, it can be. Serena Software and this Scrum Nosy are two examples of other companies that have, or other organizations that have branded versions of Nosy. So we'll make sure that we give you some examples in the follow-up.
So Laura, there's also David also had a question about a case study of buy a project that he could show a VP or CIO.
Um, we used Buy a Project in Daimler Financial Services, and we will be releasing a high-level case study of that project, I would say, in the next week or two. I can't use the data in the game, obviously, so it's going to be a clean-sounding case study for that. But the Buy a Project demo games are I built them based on, work that we've done, but have cleaned them up in a way that means that they're a little bit more generic and I'm comfortable using them. So I can certainly send out some game definitions for generic Buy a Project data. And that's one of those is what I was intending on playing for people who may want to join one of those games. And in terms of case studies, Daimler Financial Services and BWin Party are two companies that used that game as a project type game rather than features, which is what I think a lot of people are familiar with in terms of prioritizing backlogs and agile and things like that. We're basically taking the content to be bigger projects rather than features and software.
Laura, there is also a similar idea. We have a white paper that was done a couple of years ago about sales engineers using buy a feature to vote on their upcoming projects.
Yeah, that would
Um,
actually be, I forgot about that one. That would actually be a good thing to follow up on too, or to add into the follow up, because the buy a feature game is actually incredibly flexible. So I think that's another good example of how that can be adapted. Any other questions before we wrap up? So I just want to thank you all for giving us your time. And what I would just recommend doing is, as you kind of think about this a little bit, if other things come up or you wish you had other answers or you have other questions or you need some kind of help from us, please email one of us, get in touch with Tammy, and we'll make sure that we get you whatever you need to help you do this.
Hey, Laura, David has another question about the
Mhm.
major new features of buy a feature.
So the biggest changes and things that I'm really excited about are you can reserve spots for players and start the game before everyone has arrived. And that means that a player can shoo into a spot even if they're 5 or 10 minutes late. Um, it's a lot easier to redistribute money and to add money into the game after it starts, or to redistribute one player's money if they have to leave early. And so the facilitator has a lot more flexibility on how to handle incoming players and also how to handle um, the funding inside the game. Tammy, is
The
there anything that?
chat, the chat is also redone, and I just wanted to point that out because we're actually using chat bubbles, similar to what you see on, say, a phone when you're texting, so that people are in different colors. And also the chat was moved to the left side to make the game board the focus, so it's now on the right. It looks a lot cleaner and it's easier to see what you're doing.
Yeah, I actually like how the whispers are displayed now too. So it's very obvious what the whisper threads are versus what the public chat is. So I find that a lot. That's pretty useful as well.
Yeah.
And it just looks prettier. So there's definitely functionality built in, but our new UI team is really doing a nice job at redesigning our interfaces to just make them look more modern and more pretty.
We want to be beautiful too, not just useful.
Any other questions? Okay, well, with that, we'll wrap it up. And I, again, just thank you all for your time. And we hope to keep producing these and seeing you at future webinars. Bye-bye.